Really?
Yeah, but he said it's expensive.
Oh.
Super expensive.
Yeah, I don't want to spend an arm and a leg.
Yeah.
I'd just like to have a place where I could run down to.
All right, I'd like to call this meeting of the City of Salina Building Advisory Board to session. We'll start with a call to order. Roll call, starting on the right.
Mark Frazier.
Jim Reed.
Charles Renz.
Ryan White.
Ben Wendholtz.
Lance Smith.
Kevin Cool.
Okay. Chair requests staff confirmation that the Kansas Open Meetings Act required notice has been properly provided.
Yes, I can confirm that the packet was posted and the required notice was provided.
Okay. Approval of minutes from the November 5th, 2025 special meeting.
I move to approve the minutes for November 5th, 2025.
Second.
Okay, I got a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. New business, public hearing items. None. Quasi judicial matters, none. Legislative matters, review of the proposed 2018 IFC.
Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. I am pulling up a PowerPoint here real quickly. So the last meeting that you were all here together for that special meeting, we did go over some updates to the International Fire Code. We're bringing those back to you today to go a little bit further in depth on two of the different items. There's a staff report that was included in your packet. We're not going to read that to you. Hopefully that you looked that over, but we will go over these slides just to do a little brief overview of the updates, as well as then going into those two specific items that we'd like to discuss today. So as a reminder, there are some general updates to the International Fire Code that we went over at the last meeting, including food truck regulations, Group E sprinkler thresholds, manual fire alarms in assembly spaces, exit discharge illumination, outdoor assembly and trade shows, and then self-service storage facilities. Today we're going to focus in on two items. One is the Group A2 occupancies with alcohol consumption. And I'm going to pass it off to Joe here to talk about these little pieces here and talk a little bit about the code and what that summarizes of the changes for the 2018.
All right, so just before we get into that, in your packet for the self-storage facilities, and that 7,500 square foot, after discussing with the State Fire Marshal's office, they are in the 06. They don't have this requirement as of yet. Once they go to the 24, then they'll have the 2,500 square feet requirement, and they're going to leave that in. So if that happens in 2 years, 4 years, whenever, this local amendment will have to be taken out, just to let you guys know. As far as the A2 occupancies go, we did go out and meet with the three that were identified. One being VFW, one was the Muse, and one the Temple. The only one that we really found to have an issue, or this would fall under, that we can't really find a way around, is the VFW, and I guess there's two, and Masonic Temple. The ballroom, we talked with owner Johnny Kim, and he does not allow alcohol in his facility anymore, and it's just a bingo hall. And so that one, unless it changes hands or changes use, the sprinkling requirement would not affect him the way he's operating now. With the VFW and Masonic Temple, kind of the issues that we found there are that they're both nonprofits. With the passing of the big beautiful bill, there was a provision in there for a lot of tax relief to install, but it doesn't do them a whole lot of benefit being tax not for profit and stuff like that. So that's still going to be in effect if we adopt this the way it in the model code. Kind of the background with that, we dug deep into, it says consumption, so that's not just the sale of alcohol. That would, if you bring alcohol in for a party, anything like that, that would also fall into that. So then they'd have to be sprinkled. The retroactive is for the 300 occupant load. Any new A2 that alcohol is going to be consumed has that threshold of 100 before it has to be sprinkled. So there's a little bit of difference between the pre-existing and something that's coming in new. Now, I don't see any of the representatives from the Temple or VFW, but we had conversations with everybody over a 2-day period, I believe.
Yes.
They were all understanding. They were all given packets and information of today's meeting, where it's being held and everything, so they could come and voice their concerns with it. I guess with all of that, we do have some options. We could delete the IFC 1103.5.1 in its entirety and not adopt it at all. Option 2 would be adopt the IFC 1103.5.1 as written with a 2-year compliance window. With that 2-year compliance window, that could give the state enough time to adopt the 24, and then we'd have to see where they land, if they would make this happen or not. The concern with that is the state normally doesn't do, if a business is already established, they let them do the pre-existing non-conforming, but this specifically says retroactively, so they don't know if they're going to adopt this yet or not, because they're in the very infancy stages of looking at the 2024 code. Option 3 is we could do a local exception to it. We keep it the way it is, with the exception of, under this option, businesses would be allowed to have events with more than 300 people or 300 occupants if alcohol beverages are not consumed, or events with fewer than 300 people with alcohol service being allowed. So if they went over the 300 people, no alcohol could be consumed. If they kept it at $2.99, then they could have alcohol. The majority of the people that we spoke to don't have events that large normally. They have a couple, let's say probably 2 or 3 a year that would exceed that. So it wasn't a major fiscal impact to anybody that we spoke with. Option 4 would be adopt IFC 1103.5.1 with no changes at all. And we just keep it the way it is. Option 4 would go into, once it went through City Commission, come January, there's no leeway period or grace period like Option 2 would have. So, any questions on that? I know we had some before.
So if we don't adopt it at all, we just wait for the state to come to 24 and then go, then that would be retroactive here, right?
Correct. We could wait for that to happen, see if the state would do a compliance window. They might do a compliance window because it is retroactive. But that is an option that we have. The thing that I would caution about with that would be if we delete it in its entirety, does that take out the sprinkler requirement for the new construction of 100? At 100 in an A2,
Right.
would we have to delete that out of other sides of this?
Was it option 2 that had the 2-year compliance?
Yes.
What if we do the option 2 where we adopt it, but, we put that compliance to if the state changes the rules or the code instead of just that 2-year?
When I spoke with the state, they're not sure when they're going to go. We've heard for 15 years that they were changing to a new code cycle. I do know that they have hired the ICC to come up with their changes and moving forward into the 24. So my guess is it's not going to be years and years down the road. When I spoke with them, their biggest concern and hang-up is going to be getting it through the legislature and that process.
Right.
So we can do a 2-year window. You can recommend 3 years or 4 years, or you can increase that window if you'd like, and then we can see where the state lands, when they land, how they land on this.
I wouldn't mind seeing them.
Can I say something? Sorry.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
So, one of my concerns with that, Mark, is because with this, if you look at the overall impact of businesses, if we do the adopt as written with a 2-year compliance window, and in 2 years, say we change it to 4 years, whatever it is, if sometime in that meantime the state comes in and adopts it, our window's gone. If they come in,
I completely understand
The
that.
other thing is if we do it with a compliance window, and these businesses now start doing the work, and the state comes in and says, "Yeah, we're going to take it out completely. We don't need to have it." Now we've impacted a business negatively to where they're starting to be compliance for us, and then they don't need to because the state didn't do it.
Right.
Looking at and that's why I went with the exception is if you look at the overall businesses, the businesses talk to you, we're talking between the combined businesses, 8 to 9 events a year impact. That and even both businesses said that, you know what, it's not the end of the world. Those very few events we're talking about would not cause a giant financial impact. So we're trying to balance the life safety side of it with financial impact of not having to do it, or not impacting the business by not being able to do their stuff. That's why we do if we do the exception that allows them to do 95% of their events with no change, no impact, nothing.
Right, and I understand that.
So-
What I'm saying is, I'd like to see that exception taken out to like 4 years instead of 2. And if the state comes in before that and has to be changed, fine. But I don't know what everybody else thinks, but I'd like to see a longer.
My only concern there is if you have as I said, with a business that wants to get ahead of it, and so they start doing the change to be done in that window, and the state either comes in or takes it out, and they don't have to do it at all. Now they've already spent X amount of dollars towards putting one in, where if the state took it out and we don't enforce it, because our exception with the 8 to 9 events a year makes it where they don't have to do it as long as they don't do those events. And I understand. I'm not trying to lead push you guys one way or the other. That's my only concern with what you're saying is that pushing it down the road, if you have an event area that tries to make it right, and then 2 years from now the state comes in and says, we're not going to do it at all, and we agree as the city, say, you know what, we can not have it. Now that company or agent, business has already impacted and started the work, that they didn't necessarily need to. That's my only concern with
Yeah,
doing that.
I was just looking at it as the longer that's drawn out, maybe they could start, raising some money. That way, if this thing comes up, they can afford to do it at that time.
And we discussed that, over a 2-year period, it gives them 2 budget cycles to kind of start planning. If you do 4, then, there's 4 budget cycles. Okay, a little bit at a time. But like I said, it's really your guys' decision on if you want to go with option 2 or any of these options. And if you do like option 2, but want to change the compliance window, I'm sure you'd have to do a motion to change that and all that, but it's up to what you guys are comfortable with there.
So what determines the 300 occupants? Is that calculated, or is that you're saying that they post occupancy to not more than 300, or how's the 300 determined?
For option 3, where they'd have alcoholic beverages or not, so the 2 that were impacted, when we discussed this with them, they said, like the temple, most of theirs are going to be wedding receptions. And Mary Landis said that it'd just be in their contract, 300. Once you get to that 300 threshold, then no alcohol. Keep it a little bit smaller. But I think she said rarely do they have 300 for one of those receptions.
So it's an honor system.
Pretty much.
More or less.
It's not going to be, unless we get a complaint, we're not going to go in for every one of their events and count heads as they come in.
And if somebody said, well, okay, it's not going to impact us financially to not have those events, they could still have events with less than 300 and have the alcohol. Mm-hmm. And in the event that they wanted to have 400 people, is there a provision that through a fire watch or through some other means, is there something that could be worked out to where they could, pay for that service? If it was, then it could be up to the person who is renting the venue to cover that cost for them, but it wouldn't be completely out of the picture. Is that something that?
So we discussed that also in our internal meeting. The problem that we see with that is the code says 300, and that's what, if we adopt it, that's what it is. And so it kind of comes down to liability if we say, well, we can do it here, and this person, you can't do it over here, or, what's to say you have 400 people in an event, something happens, and now who is going to be liable for that? Is that coming back on the city for allowing 1 or 2 of these events a year? Today marks the anniversary of the Ghost Ship fire, which was a assembly occupancy underground club where a lot of people died because they didn't have sprinkler systems, alarm systems, overcrowding, kind of like the station nightclub. So occupant load is very important. And I just see a lot of risk and liability if we allow events over that when we adopt the code that says this is our limit. And it's a lot of times if you're going to go over that, you're not going to go over by 1 or 2 people. If you're going to go over the 300, you're going to go big and you're going to have as many people as you want.
How does that affect some of these more like private venues like the one out on Old 40, the one that's over by my shop on York Street, where they have, big wedding receptions.
Those are sprinklered.
That one, the one on York is sprinklered. The one out on Old 40, the state has been in contact with them. I know the state is really starting to crack down on event spaces, unpermitted, and they're really coming in looking for those either separations, sprinkler systems, alarms, life safety systems, and they have come down pretty hard on some of them that have come up, and they are actively looking for the other ones. So we know of a couple in the county, and I know the state has called specifically on the one, and they went and did an inspection on it. And I do believe that they are wanting them to put in a sprinkler and alarm system out there.
That's
But
what I've heard.
the one at over by your business, that one started out that way and then was sprinkled and alarmed. So now they can have as many as they, whatever the building can hold, not just the cap at the 300.
Okay.
Under option 3, with a local exception, does the state still get involved if you have the local exception?
So with all of our codes, the IFC, once we approve it, it has to be sent to the state fire marshal's office, and they will go through it and compare it to what they currently have. They'll look at all of our amendments, our exceptions, and if they deem it to be less restrictive than what they have, then they will reject it back and have us make the changes. State Fire Marshal's office now has in-house legal counsel, so it'll also go through their legal department to make sure that we're not, in that realm of not meeting the minimum standards that they have. But normally, if we do a local exception and it does not, if it's more restrictive than what they have, they normally will let that go.
Wouldn't this just have to be considered less restrictive than what they?
For right now, they are in the 2006, and this is not in the 2006.
Oh.
So at this moment, until they go to the 24, where this would be in it, then we're good. Once they go to the 24, then we'll probably end up getting a letter that says you are now less restrictive, and at that time we'd have to take this one out, along with probably the self-storage one. We have a couple here that we've done local amendments for that they're fine with right now, but in the future, once they go to the 24, we'll have to make some changes.
To me, I feel like we almost need a combination of 3 and 2. I like the exception for the specific places that we discussed. But there's also a real possibility that there's some other locations in town that we didn't consider, and then they would be under that burden if we don't have a window for them to comply. Assuming that, okay, we want to have over 300 people with alcohol, we still need a compliance window because I can't get that done this month, and so I'm closed down until I can get this done, and they're 9 months out before they can begin installation. So to me, I feel a combination of 2 and 3 would be a good compromise on this.
Yeah, and you brought up a good point with if they're 9 months out, which we know a lot of the pipe fitters are months out. Going back to Mr. Fraser's comment, is 2 years enough? If they're 9 or 10 months out, it doesn't give them a whole lot of time. Do we extend that period just a little bit and make a hybrid of 2 and 3? And
I think that would be a good idea, and then extend that compliance period out a little.
Would you say to be permitted within 2 years, which would give them a third year for insulation or for installation?
Yeah.
Because once you're permitted for it, then you have a year basically, don't you? With inactivity after
180
6
days.
months.
6 months.
Yeah.
So, I have a question with what so my confusion on this is if you do the exception of 300 or more and you do a 2-year compliance, that to me almost steps on each other. That says I don't have to do this 300 or more because I got 2 years to get it fixed.
Yeah, I see what you're
So
saying.
you're kind of double dipping, and I don't see how that solves anything in the beginning.
If we have event venues with occupancy over 300 and they want to continue to have alcohol, they have 2 years to comply. If they don't want to have alcohol, they don't have to comply.
Then why have the exception that says you can't have alcohol over 300 then? If you're already pushing it out 2 years to say you can keep doing this for 2 more years, what's the 300 exception going to do?
Raise it from 100?
No. It's already, you mean talking about building a new one or existing?
Oh, well, okay.
So we're talking about just existing.
Yeah.
So if there's one out there existing, the 300, we're saying you can still do events. When you hit 300,
So the
it's no
300 is
alcohol.
to keep somebody like the VFW from being
it's not
overtaxed.
keeping, but yeah. So
Yeah.
our exception was to say, hey, look, currently the way the law is written, or the way IFC code is written, is starting tomorrow. You can't have events at all because
Right.
you have an occupancy over 300 and you consume alcohol.
Right.
We're just saying, with the exception, saying, hey, you can have events up to 299 in alcohol, but the minute you hit 300, you can't have alcohol anymore. The way the current code is written is tomorrow, you can't have anything if you have an occupancy over 300. So we try to do the exceptions to allow 95% of the normal business.
Gotcha, I see what you're
My
saying.
concern is if you do the the extension out and the 300 exception, that exception doesn't do anything because we're already giving them 2 more years to comply. So I'll keep doing 400, 500 people for 2 years.
Yeah.
It doesn't gain anything. I mean, I don't have a problem if you go 2 versus the exception, but it does. I don't. The double dipping on it doesn't gain you anything.
But with option 3, with option 3, they're less than 300. They're unaffected.
Right.
If at more than they're only affected at events over 300, not calculated occupancy over 300 at events over 300. And so if we go with option 3 and somebody says, well, I want to be able to have those events whenever I want, what is their timeline for compliance? I mean,
With option 3, there is no compliance timeline. You just can't have that event the way it's currently written. Option
Until-
3.
Basically, if you have a wedding reception with 400 people, from the 2 places that are identified, you wouldn't be able to have alcohol there. So,
from the day
there's-
the code is adopted.
Correct. But we did talk to them. If the one exception that we kind of had there is if they had things already scheduled, then we'd take that into account because we don't want to say, well,
That's kind of where I was.
Yeah, we spoke to the temple specifically, and we don't have a problem with. So we can.
Just
It's kind of like
nothing new
Yeah, it's like the enforcement.
from
If
that
anything's
point
on the
forward.
book, and we can put in there on the exception is, this would affect. This would impact events after. But so that basically was, and we asked because Marianne with the temple brought it up because they book out. VFW not so much, but the temple books out. And we told her, look, we understand if you already got an event on the book. And she said, she's like, you know what? I don't have a problem with reaching back out to people. We didn't want to do that to her, but she's like, I don't have a problem with reaching back out to people saying, hey, look, if you cross this threshold, we're going to have to change this. But we also don't want to impact, we're not trying to impact businesses a great deal either. Mm-hmm. So there was discussion about that, about it being, hey, look, we can put something in there about if the event's already documented on the books, and that's a different compliance window, I believe, than what Ryan, you were saying, correct?
Well, I guess, so maybe this permit. So if I read down on under option 4, with no changes, it says there already is an exception, which is the identical exception that we are proposing amending. Is that just not supposed to be there?
There is no exception
Okay,
on option
because
4.
it's under option 4, there's an exception.
are you in the ordinance, Ryan?
So with option
Option
two,
3.
Or you're on
we would just be
Option-
adopting
Option 4 ends here.
the code.
Option 4.
Option 4 would be full
Stop
adoption of the
freaking
code
me.
with no exception.
Gotcha. Oh, okay, I see it. Never
It'd be
mind, sorry.
full sprinkler requirement from day one.
But if we do 2 with the exception, and that makes retroactive on new businesses, then,
Retroactively on,
businesses.
no, well, on any new business, it's 100 or over.
right.
That will go into effect. And it'll give the other ones the option of 2, 3, whatever we decide. I think option 2 is, to me, takes care of both things. Because I would like to give them a window for compliance to be able to raise money or whatever they think they need to do to get to that point. But, you know, they need to keep it 300 or under. And it brings the new businesses into the present code.
But if they keep it under 300, if they're okay being under 300, then
Until,
They don't-
well, all I'm saying, until the state steps in and says, okay, that's no longer, you're gonna have to sprinkle your building. Because it'll come to the 100 or more.
well, it's not. It shouldn't come to the. It won't come to the 100.
So
anymore.
the 100 is only brand-new buildings.
It'll never come to 100 at all with existing building.
So if they can stay under 300, they would never have to sprinkle.
Correct.
When consuming alcohol.
Right.
If
Under
you,
option 3.
Right.
open a new assembly, even an existing building,
Right.
but it goes from business to assembly, today, tomorrow, no matter what the state says, that's 100 anyway. 'Cause you're
Right.
changing.
I understand that. but-
Existing, so the two, we're
So
talking,
that would stay that for, the 300 would stay for the state after they adopt that code? They wouldn't have to sprinkle either?
on existing,
As long as they're under 300.
correct.
So I would, then option 3 is probably the best way to go. I mean, they need to stay under that 300 mark.
Yeah, and like, we looked at the grand scheme of things. I said, if you look at both businesses,
I see what you're saying.
we're literally talking 9 events a year that it would
Right,
impact.
right.
So it's like 99% of both of them's business we're not touching. It's
Right.
that 1% that they both actually were very reasonable and say, you know what, we can deal with that. You know, like I said, the VFW was 3 to 4 events and the temple
Right.
was 4 to 5. They both said we can accept that seems like a reasonable option for us.
Well,
to,
I can accept that. I
Yeah.
mean, I think that is the best option.
So that's why we
You know,
tried to
and-
look at it.
Not that it's 300. If you had 299 inside and a line outside, and one comes out and one goes in, and you're keeping that occupant load inside under the 300,
Right.
then you can still have the alcohol. It's just
Right.
So to put that in perspective, the VFW, he says that there was 3 events and they were poker runs and toy runs. He says when the event starts and everybody's there, including children, they're not really serving alcohol. So when the kids get the toys or they distribute them to whatever charity, most of the people leave, and that's when they kind of have the open bar thing go on, and it is well under 300 at that point.
Oh, yeah.
So he was saying that this would probably not even affect his business at all as far as the events that they hold. They just have to keep a careful eye on it. The temple, Miss Landis says that anytime they have an event over 150 people, they require security to be there. So security could keep a count and they could keep people out of those areas if they start going over 300. She did mention that they have future events already booked, which we told her we'd try to work with her with. But how many did she say? About five or six of them?
yeah, but not all of them are. She said most
Yeah.
of them aren't 300. I believe most of hers were 150, 200-ish
Yeah.
people.
So
So, yeah, it's not affecting a bunch of events. And, like, Ian was saying, the poker runs and things like that. They said most of the crowd is in the parking lot.
They are. I've been on a lot of those.
They go. So it's.
Well, I mean, even at weddings, I mean, while they're actually having the ceremony, most people are not drinking. And then when the ceremony's over and they start the reception, there will be quite a few people that probably leave. So, I mean, keeping that number didn't seem like a big deal to any of these businesses. These are the only 3 businesses we scoured this town that has an occupant load over 300 that isn't sprinklered. So, I mean, there might be some out in the county or other places that we're not thinking of, but I mean, we're not in regulatory of them. So putting a large deadline or like suspension on this for years to come, I mean, that would give people, you know, some notice, but eventually, I mean, you're putting a timeline on something, so they're preparing for it, and then the state could come back and go, well, we don't want this either, and then they've saved all this money, they've had all these events to raise this money, and now they don't even have to do it. So we were just kind of hoping to get this exception in there to where they could do 95% of their business, but also forewarn them that when the state comes through with the 24, it's ultimately going to be their decision whether they keep this code or not. And that will be the determining factor. But I mean, you've had quite a bit of time up until then. Like Joe says, I mean, they've been talking about upgrading that code since I started working here. So it could be 2 years, it could be several years from now. But to put a timeline on it, you're kind of putting that you know, end time clock on them to raise all this money for what may or may not be able to be coming.
And you'd be relying on the state to amend that section. And in my experience, they don't amend anything.
The majority of the departments and municipalities that have adopted this section give some sort of compliance window. It'd be very difficult, in my opinion, for the state to come in and say, as of, you know, when they adopt it, at the end of the year, you have to have this done or you can't do business. They're not, it's bad publicity to shut anybody down. So I don't think the state is going to want to do that. I could see the state also doing a 2-year compliance window or some sort of compliance window. I believe with option 3, that could give them, if the state takes 4 years to make this change, and then the state says, we're going to require this, but we're going to have another 2-year compliance window. Well, now we've just given them 6 years to kind of look forward to it. I mean, we've informed them that this could happen. It's on their mind. If through other state meetings we find out that they are going to be kind of pushing this, we can start preparing them early for it. So it's not a big surprise, and hopefully get them a couple extra years before they would have to do something, you know, save money for, you know, that 4-year period that we were talking about. But give them that option right up front, the 300, under 300 option.
I like the option 3 idea. I really do.
Under, if this code is adopted with the option 3 in there, this only applies to existing business. All new buildings that come in that would want to do this type of serving alcohol would have to go into compliance with sprinkler systems, correct?
Correct.
So it's only those 3 that we're talking about right now. If you've scoured the town, it's only these 3 that are really under the option 3.
Correct. But if I'm trying to think of a place that's not sprinkled. If, say, a B occupancy large building that's not sprinkled, and that company leaves, and then somebody says, hey, I guess a good example would be the facility out on Old 40. Was a furniture store, was never sprinkled, body shop, you know. They bought that. This would make a great event space, and not being sprinkled to now having events there, since it was like a B occupancy to an A, an assembly space, now they would have to, that'd be the only time that the 100 would come into effect.
So it wouldn't be a new building. It would be
Not
a new
necessarily a new
occupancy.
building.
A new
business.
occupancy. And
Changing occupancy classes.
Right.
So if a business left and another business came in, you know, it wouldn't require that change. It's only this A2 occupancy. If they went to something else, they could still have mixed use in it as long as that A2 space was under the 300. They could.
Well, and
They'd still
they-
be the 100 because they're changing.
Yeah, to address your question, so if that were to happen, Ben, that kicks them out of this category completely. They go to 100.
Right.
That's a different section of code. That's not this.
Because they're gonna fall under having to put in what they're going to be doing with that building, and that's going to be a whole set of rules.
What-
If they need to change the code or change the restrictions or whatever on the.
Correct. As far as the code's concerned, whether I repurpose
Right.
a building or build a new one,
Right.
I'm falling under the same set of rules.
Yeah.
And
So
your-
that's kind of at that point, it's a totally different thing.
Your occupant load is going to change when your businesses change. So if you have a B occupancy and you're going to go to an A, the load calculation is not the same for a B as what it would be for an A.
Right.
Significantly
So
different.
there'd be, you know,
Right.
when they want to change and they do anything, submit plans to us, we're going to require a code footprint, which a design professional is going to redo all those calculations and, you know,
All your blueprints and everything, all that's going to be addressed at that time. So, and then, if the state is involved, then you're down to your 100 or whatever, and hopefully that restriction is enough for them. I don't know what's in the 24, so.
Well, and the other thing to think about is the way this is currently written, that we wouldn't be modifying, it says fire area. So if I were to build an A2 assembly, with 300 occupants, and I start breaking if I start breaking the A2 into different fire separation areas, that's another way I've now complied with the code. So if you take a big business and turn it into an A2 with alcohol, and they start putting in fire partitions and fire walls, breaking them down, as the occupancy of that building may be over 300.
Right.
But I've got separate fire separation in that area where each room is different. The way the code is written is it says fire separation.
Separation. Oh.
So if I were to build fire walls or fire separations, that's another way of complying with the code. I wouldn't have to sprinkle.
Without having to sprinkle.
Correct.
Good.
any other questions on the A2 side of things?
Can we I'd like to make a motion to adopt option 3 of the IFC fire code.
I'd second it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any more discussion? We'll vote then. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. Okay, motion carries. Adopting option 3 of the IFC 1110 or 1103.5.1 with a local exception.
Perfect. Thank you, Chair. We're going to move on to the second large discussion piece that we had last time. This was in relation to Appendix D about fire apparatus access roads. So as a reminder, here just up on the screen, why Appendix D matters. So it governs emergency vehicle access into new developments, required number of access points, when 2 remote entrances are mandatory, minimum design standards for non-city fire access roads, long-term maintenance responsibilities are some additional pieces that we're adding in here. So we talked about some key challenges at our last meeting. Mostly regards to in remoteness requirements, where they can often not be met due to existing streets, block sizes, or physical barriers. State law prevents the city from using sprinklers as an exception for 1 and 2 family developments. Single access projects sometimes are feasible but are not permitted by the strict model language. And then there's unclear responsibilities in the code for design, certification, and maintenance of non-public fire access roads. So with that, we have a couple of different pieces of amendments to meet all of those different challenges that we've talked about. Let's start with remoteness. Joe.
All right, so with the remoteness requirements, according to the ICC, the half the distance of the diagonal, this is kind of a repeat of last time, is really was designed for square and rectangle parcels. When you start getting into longer, skinnier parcels, it gets a lot more difficult because you have to take it from the longest point between those two, and sometimes it's very difficult to get that half the distance. So what we have, we looked at the city block on Santa Fe, which seemed to be longer blocks, and the average is about 300 feet between streets. And so we can navigate those pretty easily. 300 feet seems to be a decent distance. So we discussed that 300 feet of separation between access remoteness requirement. Understanding that it's not going to meet everything that we've had in the past, the issues that we've had. We're trying to, with this exception, basically not have any pieces of property that are undevelopable. We'd like to be able to develop those properties and not restrict some of these developments that want to go in. But with that said, we also know that topography and other things play a big role in some of these developments. So 300 feet, we discussed it with line personnel at the fire department. We've discussed it internally. And we're all kind of on the same page. That should be plenty of distance. Like I said before, if there's something blocking a road, our guys have plenty of tools to either push, pull, cut, drive around, anything like that. And Chief Pearson has also said the same thing, that our guys have that directive of we're going to get there one way or another. The delay might be a little longer if we have to cut, trees out of the way or whatever, but we're going to get there. And if that's using a bumper, then we're going to, if we cause some damage to get to a house or whatever, we're fully aware of that damage can happen.
So Joe already kind of spoke about this, but so the remoteness piece here is that 300 feet, but then he started talking about the different topography or different pieces of that piece. So I'm going to bring up this next slide for limited single access developments and what that local exception could look like.
Right. So the single access, we kind of look at what does a typical street look like with a median. And so if we had the travel lanes of 29 feet curb to curb, and then a large median. 9th Street is probably close to a 9-foot median. So basically you'd have the width of 9th Street going in where it is divided into a development. Rarely would we have all 29 feet on both sides compromised where we couldn't get into someplace. So that is also another option of a local amendment that we could do instead of the remoteness. Again, these are all up to you guys as far as the board. If you want to accept it, make changes, anything like that, we are aware and know that you can do that. So. Any questions on the divided entry that I didn't cover?
I have a question on the 29 feet. That's basically two 29-foot drives divided by a median. Or is 29 feet a common width for a residential development for that access drive? That just seems
I believe
really
that 29
large.
feet came from, is it zoning code? I believe.
It does seem awful wide.
It seems really wide, but.
Lauren Driscoll, Director of Community Development Services. Good afternoon. Yes, so that does come from the subdivision design manual. And I think to piggyback off of what Mr. Kovacic is talking about, we saw this issue in particular. This is kind of an interesting topic to come into fire code, right? Because it's also just about as much subdivision design. And so one of the challenges we've had as we've implemented this code over the last few years, as we've increased platting, is trying to deal with geographical challenges while maintaining safety requirements and having clear guidelines on how the fire marshal is to interpret these different pieces. And so what's being suggested here is, rather than using the half of the diagonal, as Joe went over in the previous slide, well, I mean, you could have a piece of property that's oddly shaped that creates a very extreme distance to get that second entrance, where you could have a much smaller parcel. The entrance doesn't have to be as far, and that doesn't necessarily increase safety. So trying to find some kind of rationale to, okay, what is a decent distance that we actually have to measure to in the community to say, if you're at least that far away, there's a good chance that we've separated the issue enough that emergency vehicles can get in, traffic can get in and out safe. The second piece to that is, when we've got a drive system, if we're limited to only one access point, how do we keep everybody as far away from each other as possible? And how do we give some width? So if you do have, let's say, a vehicle accident, down trees, there's enough space to get everybody around in a reasonable way. So these start to create some avenues that, one, you've got that second entrance point, it's reasonable, and we get more plats that have good second entrances. Two, we also say, if you can't geographically get to that, what is a good substitute? How do we make that work? What is some guidance there? We've got the median, we've got those larger drive lanes, and how that syncs up with code.
And I'd also like to point out that some of our amendments that are in the fire code that have been deleted are because the subdivision regulation takes over that section of the fire code. So we've taken it out to be more in line with the subdivision regulations. Some of those, I believe, are street widths and things like that that have been taken out of the code for many cycles and years here in Salina to fall in line with the subdivision regulations.
Because as Joe and Ian talked about even in our last meeting, these codes come standard and packaged. And so you have certain communities that don't have, for instance, a subdivision code like we do. So they would default to their fire code to maybe address those issues. So because we have certain pieces, we default to the subdivision code versus IFC and the regulations that are in there, and that's a standard we've had for a number of years. But this component, we have looked at examples over the last couple of years of how this could work and is this doable, and it does keep that. It also keeps the same number of units. So code also says after you reach 30 units or more, you need to look for that second entrance. We looked at other Kansas communities to see how many others were doing a higher number of homes, and we found only a couple in much more urban areas. So we stuck with the 30 number. So if you're anything 30 and over, you're doing that second entrance or finding ways to create a safer single entrance. But really, we think that 300 makes it reasonable for everybody to get that second entrance in most cases.
So does that apply to new developments, or like existing developments that might have 2 drives but don't have 29 feet or?
This is not a retroactive. This would just from the point that it's adopted forward is where that would come into play. And that, also would be if something's already platted and laid out, but nothing has been built on it, it's still going on because it's already started basically in a different code cycle. So it would fall under that. There's a few developments that were platted years ago that are slowly developing. And so, they could still be on the 06 when it was platted and everything. So we could go off the 06 for some of those. This would just be from, if it's adopted, January 1st, 2026, moving forward.
Yeah, so like all the codes that you're adopting, they would be going forward rather than retroactive. What I would say, and I think Joe said it well, is we have some subdivisions that are on like their 3rd phase of development. You still have to take phase 1 and 2 into account. So if you're dealing with distances and things like that. So it doesn't automatically say, well, now they don't have to have a second entrance. Well, if you're part of a bigger development, it still takes in some of those pieces. So, but I think, and you also have to remember the number of units that coincide with that. So if you're still over 30 units in that overall development, you still have to have a secondary entrance at least 300 feet.
And that's been in for not the 300 feet, but over 30 units has been in for years, to where the remoteness requirement kicks in. And that's, like I said, some of the challenges that we face with some of these developments is that half the distance of the diagonal once they are at that 30. There is also a provision of you don't have to put that in if you're going to meet up with another street or connect with another subdivision in future development. We got a couple in town that have phases to them, and they're able to build out the first phase, but they can't do the second phase or the third phase until they connect the road with another development, or so we try and still put those conditions on. This would just allow more development quicker, in my opinion. They'd have their 30 homes quicker if need be. I don't see very many places where this is going to really come into play as much. That isn't going to develop or connect. Most developments want more than a single access point anyways. But we still have to have it just for those couple cases that we have,
And at the end of the day, 300 feet is a lot more reasonable and predictable rather than just half the length of the distance of the subdivision. Like, that doesn't necessarily prove anything, and depending on the geography and topography of that property. So 300 feet distance for those second entrances allows developers to understand what they have to be able to plan for, and it allows to really take in the actual property and be more predictable. So I think that's one of the things too, that being able to get compliance clearer up front so developers really understand where they have to put that.
And we could have a development that right now is at that 300 feet, and then the next development would have to be, 7, 8, 900 feet, separation. So this is just kind of putting everybody, find at least 300 feet distance that we can get in a secondary way in.
Do we have any existing developments that have more than 30 that don't have 2 roads going in?
More than 30 at this time.
We have older subdivisions that are before we had those standards. Do you remember what year we took Appendix D? Is it 07?
So Appendix D. So when we went from UFC to IFC, UFC was written, Uniform Fire Code was written with pure discretion. There was no requirement. It just said if a secondary is access road, it's up to the fire marshal to determine that, or the fire jurisdiction. The minute we went into IFC, it was prior. I could not do a search online prior to 2000, I believe it was. It was in there pretty much as written from 2000 IFC on. And to answer your question, there are some. I believe there are some that were pre-platted, but they were platted. We determined they were platted under the original, back when we were still the UFC, right, where it was a determination by the fire marshal. But the minute we adopted IFC, it became instantaneous that was the requirement. Appendix D was in all the IFCs I could find going back till 2000.
Are they grandfathered in, or do they have to come into compliance?
It's unless they were to redevelop the whole entire subdivision, it's developed. It's still grandfathered in.
So they don't have to worry about a second access road if they were under the
no, if they somehow added on to the end of if they extended it, somehow bought property at the end and extended that development, created a secondary development, then that's a new development. But the existing development would never be required to be brought back under an older code because they're not redeveloping.
In a lot of code, there's very, very few that are retroactive. I know we just got done with the A2 being a retroactive piece of code, but normally in a code cycle, new code cycle, you're not going to have hardly any retroactive. They just don't like forcing
absolutely
established.
That was going to be my question. Is you're going to make a development that is 40 years old come into compliant with the second access road under the new code?
Right. The problem that if we were to do something like that it's a domino effect. Because those streets probably aren't wide enough to, and we can't pick and choose. We're going to take this out of new code. We're going to leave this from the old code. We're going to, it just gets too confusing for people. So once it's, like I said, once it's platted, then basically that's what code you stick with. Even some of the buildings, if they have an issue or wants to come take a look, well, when was that building, built? Was it built in the 90s? Well, do we need to go to the UFC to make sure that they meet that code because they're not changing anything specifically or, any major changes? Well, we'd have to go back to those codes. If they changed occupancy type or anything like that, now we can bring them up. But as far as roads and subdivisions, normally once they're platted, you're not going to see replats in the future because once they're platted, they usually start building, and they're not going to change stuff with them.
Who come up with the magic number of 30?
That is in IFC.
It's in IFC? Okay.
And to give you an idea, Ben, the Palace night fire happened 2003.
Right.
They've been fighting. So this shows you how often the retroactive codes take place.
Mm-hmm.
They've been fighting since 2003 to get this implemented. Here we are, 15 years later. It took them 15 years to get it into a code as retroactive.
Right.
So it's not, even the ICC is not big on, pushing retroactive down people's, to make them redo something. They look at, usually retroactive is serious life safety implications and events. And they even wanted to be, part of the argument is it turned into, if it served alcohol at all, it was sprinkled.
Mm-hmm.
That was literally people going, we don't care what the occupancy load is. If they're in an assembly serving alcohol, it should be sprinkled.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the big fight, is getting them to a reasonable number. And you can go back and look at the minutes and notes over the years of the subcommittees, is them getting to a reasonable number that enough people could agree upon to say, okay, 300, we could, enough people can agree on it, we can pass this. Because you have people that are literally saying, if they serve a drop of alcohol and they have one person in there in this assembly, it has to be sprinkled. And you have other people saying, well, it's retroactive. We don't want to cause retroactive and cause harm. Mm-hmm. So it's not something that happens often in ICE. It does happen, but for the most part, it's not something that happens regularly.
Two of the subdivisions that come to mind for me that don't have the access roads would be Red Fox area, and I think the division that is west of Great Life Golf Course, they only have one way in, correct? But they're not 30 homes. And neither is Red Fox is not 30 homes.
Yeah, Red Fox is not 30, so that wouldn't
No,
qualify.
and that's what I'm talking about, is like, so then if you buy a home in that area or any of those two areas, I wonder what that does to your insurance rates if they're not up to compliant, as far as if there happened to be a large accident or something, or, to be able to get into that home and you burn to the ground.
So the one west of Great Life that you're discussing is actually one of them that we've talked about.
Right.
It has so Kansas law, so the code, one of the exceptions in code is if you sprinkle all the residences in there, that is an exception.
Right.
To not needing a second access.
Mm-hmm.
Kansas law is we cannot require you, as far as building or permitting process, to do that.
Mm-hmm.
You can covenant base do that.
Right.
And because that exception's still there, so even though we can't make you do it, you can offer it as a developer to say, hey, in lieu of this, we're going to do this.
Sure.
So that's how, in that particular case, they covenanted it with sprinklers on the ones above 30. So to answer you, that one actually is being addressed another way, one of the exceptions.
And I would like to bring to your attention also in our section B105.1 under 1 and 2 family dwellings, which is going to be Appendix B. I am waiting to get clarification back from the state on this one. Currently, we have where it says B105.1, 1 and 2 family dwellings. The minimum fire flow requirements for 1 and 2 family dwellings having a fire flow calculation area which does not exceed 3,600 square feet shall be 1,000 gallons per minute for 1 hour. Fire flow and flow duration for dwellings having a fire flow calculation area in excess of 3,600 square feet shall not be less than that specified in Table B105.1. Basically, what this is saying is if you can't get 1,000 gallons a minute in that for that hydrant in 1 and 2 family homes, you can sprinkle those homes, and that gives you a 50% reduction in that requirement. So if you have 500, a water line that is only supplying 500 gallons a minute, and you sprinkle those homes, then you'd meet code. If not, then it'd have to be the 1,000, and you'd have to either bring another line in or somehow boost your water, So I just want to bring that to your attention. I did bring that up to the state. because of the state statute that we can't require sprinkler systems, but this is kind of giving that almost a requirement if they can't meet the flow requirements. And so they are doing their research to see if this is against the state statute or not. But I just want to bring that to your attention that it is in our local amendments and code. And
That fire flow kind of outside outside the developer's control or outside the home, specifically the building owner or the occupancy, that's kind of outside their control.
Yeah. Probably where you'd see this the most would be dead-end lines and things like that, where we're not getting a loop system in. And there is the one exception that we do have is construction, exception C on that. Construction is on a tract of land for which final platting and zoning was in effect as of August 1st, 1989. So we do have some areas in town that the fire flows have been pretty poor, and they're getting a lot better. I believe the water department and Martha's been doing a outstanding job of finding those lower flow areas and putting new pipe in and getting those flows increased over time. We always had low flow issues up on North 13th, and she has replaced that line, and we have really good fire flows up there now. So
one subdivision that I brought up, the one west of Great Life, I remember years ago they wanted to extend to the south, and the water line wasn't near what it needed just for the homeowners, and then they got approval from Great Life to do a loop line around that property. So that would have brought that subdivision probably up into compliance as far as gallons permitted, because of the fact that they didn't even have anything close to begin with. So
there is a special assessment approved water line for that subdivision that's being built this year.
Yeah, that was like 3 years ago. I think that was addressed or something that was done.
Less than 2. Mm-hmm. But yes, it's going to be constructed this year. So
it's not even in yet.
No,
okay.
But
because
there's water and there's fire hydrants in that subdivision already with adequate flows for emergencies. There's fully paved roads. There's secondary emergency access. And as it was mentioned, there are sprinkler requirements through covenants for construction. And a looped water line is being constructed this year.
Right.
So even during construction, they're perfectly safe with hydrants.
Yeah.
And once they did sprinkle or have that in their covenants, that takes away the requirement for that secondary access. They went ahead and improved their secondary access and put one in on their own accord, but it was not a requirement for that subdivision once they put the sprinkler system in their covenants that made that requirement go away. But
so that particular subdivision is sprinkled?
Yes, every house
is sprinkled.
will be sprinkled when they're built.
Sprinkled.
Okay, yeah, first of all, we probably need to come back to this because this is a platting issue.
Yeah,
so
I don't want to get involved. Yeah.
There are requirements. There is not a home constructed in the latter phase of Overlook Estates.
Right.
So there's 2 subdivisions essentially going on there, one major original plat. There's a lot of different pieces going on there.
New subdivision has to come in, be sprinkled, but not the old.
It needs to come into compliance, the new one. It has geographical challenges. It has the river, or it has a long spat of private property to get all the way back to the road. So when you look at access components and you look at distance, which that property has been platted, and platted under current code, in order for them to get secondary access, which was difficult, they chose the sprinkler option, which they are able to enforce through covenants because we can't require that.
Right.
So, but they do have an improved secondary emergency access that's always been there when the original subdivision was put in. And currently, as they're getting ready to start construction on the first home in that subdivision, the road is fully paved and able to support an emergency access vehicle, which is what Joe's going to talk about next. And there are hydrants there along there with water that can be used by the fire trucks during construction. And a fully accessible loop will be installed before certificate of occupancy is given.
Yeah. I'm sorry, guys. I got off topic. And we're dragging this out
And-
way more than.
And those sprinkler systems are not like sprinkler systems that are in businesses. It's a residential sprinkler system that comes off the domestic line. It's not near as detailed or intricate as a commercial system. So,
But Joe, you would say, like, I mean, sprinklers are going to be the rarity. It has to be a very specific situation, and we left that section of code in if that is something somebody wants to use as an option. But the reality is the majority of plats are going to focus on finding a secondary entrance. In worst case scenario, due to geography and topography, we may have to look at some other components such as large streets with the median to be able to give that additional access. But really, secondary access is that number one choice. And then I think some of the other things that have been added to code, like making sure that the roads can withstand and using licensed engineers to get that road standard. A lot of times during construction, you know, somebody will call in and say, hey, we want to start footing in foundations. Can we do that? Well, we're not sending the fire truck until the road can actually support it. So just throwing out gravel is not going to be enough. How do we know it can support a fire truck? We've never had this in code and made it clear enough. So that's some of these local amendments start to get like how we will deal with those things during building and construction. So I think that's a good segue.
So the IFC has not, it just says that an access road has to be able to support an apparatus of 75,000 pounds or more. It does not give how they get to that point. And over the years, we have discussed, do we put in that it has to be X number of inches of base, you know, this and that. Well, with the different areas of town, you might say 3 inches of base across the board. Well, on the north end, it might just eat that 3 inches of base and you're still, you know, sinking in the mud. So what has been in the code is that it has to be designed and basically signed off by a licensed engineer, a geotechnical survey saying this is what the base is, this is what we've done, and it is certified to support 75,000 pounds. The last thing we want to do is pull into a construction site and bury a fire truck, and you know that might be one time that we're going to have to use that secondary access road if they have it. But if the first one wasn't built correctly, probably the second one isn't either. And if we're sinking the first truck, it's probably a muddy mess, and we're not going to, you know. So really that 75,000 pounds and the way that for this, that's mostly just during construction that we see this. Some of the other roads, your secondary access roads, can be gravel. Now I believe it's gone to an all-weather surface is how it's worded now. But we do have some that are gravel. But most of our businesses and developments that are going on, I understand that when it's being built, they don't want to have concrete and asphalt down and heavy machinery tearing it up to where they just have to redo it again. So that's where the 75,000 pound surface comes in. Then when they're ready to pave and finish it all off, that's when you get your hard surface. And we say, you know, as long as by the end of it, we can have an all-weather surface in that area. That's what we're looking at. But during construction is probably the most important time that if there is a fire before sprinkler systems are up and running, that we need to have access, and that's why the 75,000 pounds will hold everything except for one of our trucks. And the ladder truck weighs more than 75,000 pounds, but if we put that requirement in, it'd be quite a bit more geotechnical and, you know.
All right.
So,
We need to get this meeting moving along here. I have other obligations this evening. So do we have any more discussion on that? Is that all you had? That was the end of there. Ready for a motion?
Appendix D, that is, unless you want to make changes to anything in Appendix D.
If you need a summary of those items, there's a summary up on this slide for you. If there's no further items, board members, what we'd be looking for, now that we've reviewed the proposed amendments to the IFC in a couple of different sections here, we'd like you to provide a recommendation to the City Commission regarding adoption of the amendments. You've already made a motion on section 1103.5.1. We'd just like to get your confirmation here on Appendix D and what you're thinking on those proposed amendments. And from then we'd move on to item 3.2.
Sample motion. I got a motion?
I'll make a motion to adopt Appendix D and the amendments.
I'll
Second.
second it. Go ahead.
Okay, motion second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carries.
All right, we have one final item for you all tonight. So, as a reminder, we've been going through this process here for a couple of years. Thank you for your substantial work on all of this. As we mentioned at the last meeting, we did have a public meeting at the end of October. Then in your special meeting in November, you all formally reviewed and voted to recommend approval of all the draft ordinances except for the IFC. Now that you've recommended approval of the IFC as written, we are now ready to take these forward to the City Commission for action. So what you have at the back end of your packet is a resolution.
Page 47. Around there.
Yes.
46.
Is a resolution with the Building Advisory Board recommending approval of the adoption of the 2017-2018 building codes. The 2017 is the National Electrical Code, with the rest being 2018. With the items here listed, this does not change anything that you've already done. This is just us going to take forward a resolution of support of all the items so that we can attach that to the City Commission staff report. Let you guys talk if you have any questions. Then if not, we would ask that you move to recommend the approval of resolution number 25-01.
I make the motion that we approve or recommend for taking to the City Commission the approval of resolution number 25-01.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any more discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
That is all we have for you this evening, gentlemen. We do plan to take this forward to the City Commission on Monday, December 8th.
All right. We'll get a motion for adjournment.
I'll make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Second.
All right, motion and a second. All in favor of adjournment?
Aye.
Opposed? None. All right. Thanks, guys.